The Dental Download podcast is your source for insight from conversations with fellow dentists, specialists, and leaders in the industry. With new episodes every Monday morning, I'm your host, Dr. Haley. Let's get into this week's episode. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. So I have a very fun guest here today, Dr. Connie Wang. So I had Connie on my podcast back when I think she was a second-year dental student, and she is now double doctor, dentist, and
Thank you.
pharmacist, if you remember her old Instagram handle. So Connie, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to since the last time we talked to you?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me again. Honestly, it's kind of crazy when I read that like you last interviewed me D2 year, because that feels like it was literally yesterday. And now like you're graduating. I'm a dentist. I don't know where the time went, but yeah. So last time we touched base, I'm pretty sure I was just venting about how hard dental school was. And since then, I've finished dental school and I decided not to do a residency or anything. I decided to go straight into the workforce. And so now I work as a general dentist right outside of Boston.
So I'd love to know about like your job search process because personally I ended up going, I was looking like around like suburbs of like a bigger city in Michigan, and
Mm,
there's so many dentists. Every street there's like 5 or 6 dentists. So like yes, there's a lot of like offices, but if they were hiring, they wanted someone with more experience,
mm,
or if you got hired, a lot of people have the issue where they just don't have a lot of patience as a new associate. So you're not
yes.
really like improving your skills at the rate that you'd like. You're not earning the amount that you'd like. So I ended up deciding to go to like a rural practice in another part of Michigan. So it's kind of like a change of pace and everything. But for me, I thought it would be a good starting point.
Hmm.
But what kind of was your thought process for knowing you wanted to stay in the Boston area? And what was it like looking for a job?
Yeah, so I have a couple, like, I guess, fun lessons I learned along the way because basically everything ended up completely not what I expected. So, ever since I was in dental school, I don't even know if I said this like on your podcast last time. Actually, no, ever since I've been young, I thought I wanted to move to the West Coast. Like growing up, I always watched like West Coast YouTubers, and I was just like, wow, the weather looks so perfect. The food looks great. Like I belong on the West Coast. And everyone growing up also always thought I was from California, which I thought was really cool. So like it was my identity. I was like, I'm gonna move out there once I'm done here, like by the cold weather. And what happened was I had to make the decision, okay, if I really want to work in California, I gotta start like putting out feelers. So I did the summer going from like D3 to D4 year. And then hearing I'd always heard like, the West Coast is hard, there's so much saturation. So in the back of my mind to begin with, I was kind of prepped that it would be a hard search. But what happened was it wasn't even to do with my job search. It was that Christmas break of that year, Christmas of D4 year, when I really had to start getting serious about finding jobs. I was basically for winter vacation I was going to Hawaii to see my sister because that's where she lives with my family. But there was going to be like a 4 to 5 day period where I had to watch the house and I would be alone in Hawaii. And I was like, perfect, paradise. Like, what could be better than that? I was so excited to watch her house. Wait, by the way, have you ever been to Hawaii?
Have, but I was like a little, like not little kid, but like, I don't know, like 5th grade. So I have not been as an adult. I want to go back.
Okay, so you like have to go because it's beautiful. Like it is literally paradise on earth. But what happened, I wasn't expecting this, was those like 4 days in Hawaii. I'm not even joking at all. It was kind of like a spiritual awakening because when I was in that house alone with like the beautiful weather, I had a car. I could go anywhere I wanted. I was just like, I had this reckoning moment where I was like, wait, I don't like this. I don't like not having my family here. I don't like feeling like everyone I love is far away from me. Yeah, the weather's great, but I've never experienced that kind of like sadness or loneliness, more so, I should say, being outside. I saw everyone else with their families on the beach. And I just really realized like paradise isn't paradise to me without my family. And that's when I was like, okay, you know what? I'm glad I always will have this. Paradise will always be out here. But that's when I really realized I actually am someone that would prefer to live closer to home, get to see their parents on the weekends, only be like a couple hours or like an hour drive or something. Like so I grew up in Rhode Island originally. And my thought process was always like, I'm never going back to Rhode Island. I don't know. Did you ever feel that way about your hometown? You're like, I'm gonna like get out of here.
I personally was kind of the opposite. Like, I
Really?
still think I might go back there. I don't know. I had, like, starting dental school, I thought I would definitely do a residency of some kind for general
Mm,
dentistry just to, like, live somewhere new and cool. Like, I was like, I'm going to go to, like, one of the Carolinas or this or that.
yeah.
Like, I did have that desire to, like, get out and see something cool and, like, get away from Michigan weather and all that. But it quickly passed. Like by the end of second year, I was like,
Mhm.
nah, I'm good. I want to stay here. I love it here.
Yeah. So wait, side note, I could so see you in the Carolinas. That might be a fun place for you to do like a bachelorette trip or something.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah. But yeah, so I ended up in Massachusetts because it's only like an hour and a half from home. So like I do like that Massachusetts is different. I'm experiencing new different things from like growing up at home, but I'm still close enough where I go down. And every time I go down home, I'm like, "Oh, this is so nice." Like I can't believe I ever wanted to leave. So that was my first kind of lesson I learned was everyone's a little bit different. That's totally okay if you want to like go out there, have your big West Coast adventure, if you're someone like that. But I think I just learned more about myself along the way and realized I'm someone that prefers to be closer to home and spend family time. And then the second lesson I would say I learned, Haley, did you end up trying Dental Practice Matchmaker? It's a Facebook group.
Yeah, I didn't end up posting in it because I found something like elsewhere, but I'm
Mm.
still in it and I like see people's posts.
Okay, so that was a really important Facebook group for me to join. How I got to joining it was actually a little bit more convoluted. So when I was like a fourth year dental student, I had my sights set on working in cosmetics, like straight out of school. I was like, wow, it's so elite, it's so beautiful. I still think it's like incredible and such a cool thing that we do. But back then, I just had no scope for like where I was and the level of training it takes to be where they are. And so my expectations honestly I had to manage my expectations for lack of a better explanation. So I was like shadowing a bunch of cosmetic practices. I was loving it. And I was like, wow, I like really fit in. Like, this is a great field for me to work in. But this was like one of the first few times in my life where I had to reckon with the fact that there are certain things that you just need time and experience and training for. There's no, like, so far where Haley and I have been in school, there was always like an extra credit project to do or a club to join, something to get your foot in the door to make it work, right? And this was one of those rude awakenings where it's like, yeah, there's a certain amount of networking you could do. I feel like on paper, I did all the right things. I networked with all the right people, but I was also like, there's no button I can press to accelerate my experience. I haven't experienced anything yet. And they always say in dentistry, it takes your first like 5 years or so to kind of get a handle on things. And now that I've been working, I totally understand why. But back then, I didn't have that scope because all you know is like kind of what's in front of you, right? So I was kind of disappointed when, same experience. A lot of these places, they wouldn't want to hire a new grad. I wouldn't want to hire a new grad. If anything, in hindsight, they were protecting me by not hiring me because when you enter that ball game, it's a whole different ball game, and that's not really a place where you want to be like learning these first basic ABCs yet. You want to be ready by the time you hit the ground running in those practices. Not that, general practices you don't want to be ready, but you know what I mean? It's a different level of expectations, patient population, things like that. So I'm so thankful that I didn't end up where I thought the dream would end up being because they were really protecting me and themselves too. So that's how I ended up finding this Facebook page. I went to a conference and I was kind of like sad because I was like, like I don't have any job opportunities yet. Like all my friends already matched to residency. So like they were already like D4 year cruising because they knew where they were going. I never wanted to do a residency, but I did kind of feel like a little bit of a loser because I was like, oh, like I don't have any plans yet. Everybody knows where they're going. And when you've been in school for so long, you're used to thinking a certain way. You either keep up with the pack or you're behind, right? Did you ever feel that way in dental school too, Haley?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, like you just don't want to be the one that's behind. And I felt like the one that was behind. And it was a really hard feeling to feel like everything I had worked for. This is how dramatic I am, but how dramatic anyone who's listening is probably. You think like, oh, like I worked so hard, but like I'm not where I want to be. It's a disappointing feeling. And so I joined this Facebook group and I heard good things about it. So I posted about myself, and that was about it because I kind of like knew I had so much to learn. I see all these posts all the time and they're like, I am passionate about XYZ. I love blah, blah, blah. And it's okay. Like you can be passionate about these things. But I also just felt like for the scope that I had, I'd only done like what, like 10 crowns or something at that point. Like I didn't have like the scope to really know who I was yet as a provider. But I knew myself a little bit more as a person. So I posted, I love learning about marketing. I love my dog Ellie. I love cooking. I just all the non-dental stuff. And I knew that by doing this, it felt risky at first because I was like, I'm not sharing any dental stuff. Like, who would hire based on not knowing dental stuff? But I was hoping I would attract the right kind of mentor that would appreciate that. And that's kind of what happened. A bunch of people commented, and I looked into a bunch of people, and one of them commented who ended up being my eventual boss. And I had like a mutual friend that commented and was like, oh, this guy's legit. And I was like, cool. But honestly, I wasn't like He honestly, like, I like looked him up, and then I remember just being like, cool, another general practice. And then I didn't think too much of it. I don't know like what, maybe I was busy trying to finish my requirements. You know how it is before year. Like I was just like, it was not on my radar because I was like, shoot, I need to like finish up my last few requirements. I interviewed with a bunch of people. And then spring comes along. The other people I'd interviewed with, it was good. They were like really, really nice, but I didn't have that gut feeling. And I'm someone that's like a little bit woo woo. I just feel like when I meet them, I'll know. And I didn't have that. And then so finally I go through my list one more time of who's commented. And then I'm like, oh, this guy seems kind of legit. Why didn't I ever respond to him? So then I message him. I'm like, hey, if it's still like up for grabs, like, are you still hiring? And he was like, yeah. And then so he had me meet him. And you up until this point, what I was looking for when I like looked at people was so superfluous. I was like, do they have a nice Instagram page? Like, I don't know. That's just what I thought marketing was back then as a dental student, which it is, but there's so much more to what makes a good thriving practice and a job. So he had like I just like looked up his pages and I was like, okay, sure. I didn't like have huge expectations other than like my friend said he was nice. And then Haley, when I went there and I met him, it was like so cheesy and corny, but I was like, this is it. This feels like home. This team feels like home. And specifically what it really felt like, did you ever shadow or like intern for a dental practice while you were like applying to dental schools?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I did too, and that's the place where I fell in love with dentistry. And I remember showing up, it would always just feel like such a happy place, no matter what happened, because you know, dentistry can be stressful. No matter what happened, if things didn't fit, whatever, it felt like we could all take on the world together. It didn't matter. On the bad days, they got my back. On the good days, it was awesome. We could celebrate together. And that was a special feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time. And when I went to this office, I was like, I feel like I'm like at that place, like home again. Like I felt like I would be around people I really liked. I felt like my boss really saw me for me. Also, this was something kind of cool. Out of everyone that I had met, all the other practice owners, which I understand where they're coming from, they just kept saying like, you know, you have so much to learn, but I'll make you into a star, like selling me kind of like I'll be the one to mold you into like the kind of doc you want to be. And I feel like when I met my boss, he was like the only one out of everyone that already like saw my potential, and he's like, you have like this like special whatever, and like it didn't feel like he had to mold me into anything else. It felt like he saw me for me, appreciated who I was, and was ready to help me get to the next step. But it didn't feel like he was selling me like, you're not good enough right now, but I'll make you good. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
he
I
made me
encountered
feel,
that too.
yeah, really? Okay, that's awesome. I'm so happy for you because that was so symbolic of like what our mentorship would eventually be like, because it was like kind of this secure amount of like love and support that you are enough. I'll get you to where you want to be, but you are enough as is. Like it's okay. We'll work through everything together. So long story short, that's where I ended up. And I honestly like couldn't be any happier. And I a lot of why I want to go on these podcasts and talk about my experience is because this is so not what people talk about online. Like so many people are like, if you just go into practice, there's no good jobs, you're gonna be homeless and you're gonna die. That's kind of not how it is.
Yeah, I know. For me coming from Michigan, it's a lot more common for people to go straight into working. But I think on the
Oh, okay.
East Coast, it seems like most people do residencies, especially because like New York requires it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe does Pennsylvania too? I don't know. I know New
Another
York.
state does.
Yes,
Yes.
I know New
Yeah.
York does, but so like my friends that go to school there and stuff, they're like every single person does a residency, like even if they're gonna go out of state, just because like that's what you do.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, but you don't have to if you're gonna practice somewhere else. And I think there's so much to be said about going right into work and like as you said, like you don't know everything by any means, but
Mm-hmm.
we're safe and we know like our limitations and we know like where our skills are and how to I think progress in a way that's okay, and that's why you aren't the only doctor in the office and you have someone that you can
Mm-hmm.
run cases by and like slowly level up your skills.
100%. And I think like not everyone, obviously, like a lot of people have their reasons for going into residency. I totally support residency and all of that. But I think also it kind of has become like the easy default option of being like, I feel like I'm cruising in school and everyone says I should do a residency, so let me just apply. And it's quickly becoming like this system where schools are like, well, they're going to go to residency, so it's okay if they don't learn this. And then like programs are like, oh, okay, it's becoming that default. And so for anyone listening, like I want you to like challenge yourself. Like you can totally have a good career if you go straight from school into your job. I was kind of mindful of that. I would say like D3 and D4 year. So when I was in clinic, I really tried to like maximize like obviously my experience and stuff like that. But another like kind of thing I realized in the real world too is like there's kind of no amount of experience you can do in school that will fully prepare you, but that's just because that's what school is, and that's what practicing under a school's license is. There's just something different about, I guess, working in the real world on your own license. And so that's why I also want to tell students, like, don't feel like, Joe over there did like 20 crowns and you only did like however many. So he's going to be a better dentist. It's not like that at all. Because in the grand scheme of things, you're going to do 20 crowns in like your first week of work. And then you're going to be like, oh my God, like I did all of the amount of crowns during school that I did in my first week. It's so much more exponential in the real world. So it's kind of like experience in school is important, obviously, because that's where you learn. But at the same time, there was no amount of anything more I could have done in school with like the system that we have in place that would have prepared me. You kind of just got to rip off the Band-Aid and jump into the pool.
How did you go about figuring out like how long you needed for different procedures as you like first got started, and then when did you start to kind of shrink the time down to try to get to like the normal amount of time for like a crown prep appointment or something?
Yeah, so that's honestly a great question. Part of it was I kind of sussed that out during my interview with my boss because he would show me like the associate schedule and he said like, in the beginning, we're going to give you like way more time than you need, but like when you feel ready, you tell us like how much time. And like so in the beginning I kind of booked everything myself. Like the front desk would book it, but I would tell them how much time. So if I wanted like 3 hours or 2.5 hours on something, if it was like really difficult, they would just book that. What would happen though, I think I don't remember honestly like what I started out, but it just naturally started happening where I would say I started shortening things like 3 to 4 months in, just because we would just finish appointments earlier. I'd be like, just like, shoot, I could have like done more. So then we would slowly start to shorten by like 30-minute increments to where now I still kind of do that scheduling where I'll write on our slip, like this next case is like if I know it's going to be tricky, I'm going to give myself more time. If I know it's straightforward, I'll give myself less time. But I would say 30 minutes is a good increment to kind of start bringing you down.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like when did you start to feel generally like comfortable where you weren't like, oh my gosh, like I'm working under my own license and like
Yeah.
everything's on me and like those kind of stressors? When did those at least go away?
Honestly, I think for everyone it's a little different and it probably depends on like how your support team is. For me, I would probably say the first 2 months. Maybe the first month and a half to 2 months, I was like constantly butt cheeks clenched. Like I was like, oh my God, like showing up and be like, another day I survived. And I would like go home and like nap every day after work because I was like so exhausted. But I want to say around the fall time, I kind of started being like, okay, I got this under lock. But I did have a really tricky transition hitting months 2 to 3. I want to say like in the fall, basically, if we have time for like a little anecdote. I had like this experience where sometimes what I learned is feedback is helpful, but feedback from like 10 different dentists, you're going to get 10 different answers. So that's one of the benefits of where I work is it's like a very like a multi-practice group practice kind of setting. There's lots of other docs and I'm like the youngest associate in that all the other associates I work with have been working for like 10 like many years. Like they have lots of experience. So there's a bunch of different ways to do a lot of things. For my story goes around crown impressions, right? So there's a certain techniques, there's certain different kinds, and so I was trying this new kind. My first few months I was doing the kinds like the traditional impression technique that I do at school, and that was like working great. But then I tried to switch things up, and that's when I started to have a lot of like crown seating issues, and it really dug at my confidence. Like crowns wouldn't see, open margins, like something was skewed because the way that I was trying this new impression, it was like taking an impression of impression, and like the problem with the impressions techniques works fine. It was my technique. It's very user sensitive, and so I just wasn't using it, I guess, correctly. And that's one of the things is like when you're out in the real world, you can of course try new things, troubleshoot, but the consequences are just so, I guess, they can be really hard. Like I had a lot of cases that really dug at me and I felt so bad about because one, I couldn't like figure out what I was doing wrong. And then two, it was just like digging away, not only at like my own confidence, but I'm sure like my patient's confidence in me. So it was a really tough experience. And how I got out of that was I just had to go back to my roots. I had to troubleshoot where I was going wrong. Turns out it wasn't just the impressions, it was also the prep design and things like that. It was a really good learning experience. And that, I think that learning experience also helped me cut down on my time too, because in basically what we did was we went back to the basics. I went over all of my like impression models with my boss, and we started discussing, okay, this is where the prep went wrong, and that's why the impression, blah, 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 everything is correlated. So we just stripped it back. And I mean, the really nice thing was my boss was like, hey, like, I understand, like, these things happen. Don't worry. Like, I'm not going to give up on you, obviously. Like, we'll work through this together. We'll figure it out. Let's get through this period where the next few crowns don't like work out. And then we're going to get you on the other side. So after sitting down, reviewing my preps, viewing my impressions and things like that, we finally got back to a place where like now I have like way more predictability and all that. But all that to say is that like the first two couple months, I was like screaming because I was like, this is new. But then past that, there was also this phase of really difficult times. And I'm sure that, the next difficult time is coming too. Like, I think everything just comes in waves where you have high moments and then low moments. I would say it's not just the first 2 months, I guess. Like, I would be lying if I said, oh, the first 2 months were the hardest, because it was more like that was a really rough period for me.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a difference to just like, this is new, I'm a little
Yes.
nervous, but like,
Yes.
you're still doing a bunch of good procedures, generally speaking. But when things are going wrong repeatedly, that is very hard, I can imagine.
Yeah, it was really tough. But I'm just thankful. I think that's why selecting who you choose to work with, if you choose to jump straight out of school, is so important, because like I'm sure there's people out there that would have just like given up on me or something, like it takes a very special kind of mentor to be like, I see you, I understand you, let's go through every possible little step. We were going through every material, every little detail just to get me back on track. And so I really appreciate my mentors for that.
And we've talked a lot about like your work as a dentist now and everything, but I want to know a little bit about like how the personal life side of things has been going now that you're no longer a student. You're living with your fiance, you're a dog mom, you're finally not a student after being a student forever. So what is life like for you?
Oh my gosh, Haley, this is like the biggest and best change. People don't talk about this enough. Like, it's a whole identity change, because for the first time in your life, you have time for hobbies, you have time for friends. Like, I realized after a couple months of working, I'm like, when I was in school, I had this whole identity. I was like, I thought I didn't really like traveling. I thought I didn't really like going to the movies or playing like certain things like pickleball or like random things. I realized it wasn't that I don't like those things. I was probably just like stressed and like a little depressed or something, because now that I had the time and the energy to breathe, and also the resources, like making money for the first time is really exciting. All of a sudden, life is so much richer now. It's like, wait, I do love travel. Wait, I do love playing pickleball after. Wait, I like getting drinks on a Tuesday? Sure. Like, all of a sudden, it's not like, I don't know. I think in school, I was just very regimented and controlling, and I felt like every second of my life had to be productive. So I don't know if like this is what you'll experience, but I think this is pretty common. I feel like I entered like a soft girl era where like this year, for the first time on my vision board, instead of being like girl boss, A plus, CEO, like $1,000 check, this year my vision board was like really nice sheets and clean laundry and a clean kitchen with like candles and flowers. I don't know. I feel like now that I'm not in school anymore, I have the mental capacity to think about, okay, how can I show up as like a better fiance for Jimmy? I realized when we were in school, my fiance Jimmy, he like really carried us and helped in so many different like household things, like every aspect of life. And so I feel like one of the joys of working now is I'm able to give back to him and like care for him and show up as a better partner now, because like I have that kind of mental space.
And do you work 4 days a week or five?
Yes. Okay. That's high key a very important detail. So I work 4 days a week. I cannot recommend that enough to people. I know that 5 days is the standard, but in dentistry, it really shouldn't be. I went through. So the first couple of months, I was 4 days a week. Then I had to cover for a doctor on maternity leave. It was going to be like 4 months or so. It was actually just 1 month he only needed me for, because then he found someone else. But for that 1 month, I look back and I was like, oh my God, my life was in such disarray. And the scary thing is, I didn't realize it. I didn't realize it back then until I got out of that period. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't have any time to like work out, take care of my house, do my podcast, see people I love. I was just on autopilot. And so for anyone listening out there that does 5 days a week, it's okay. Like, maybe you're fine and maybe I'm just being a baby. But personally, it was the kind of thing where I'm glad I got out of that, because I wouldn't have seen how hard it was on my body and my psyche without getting out of that. So 4 days for the win of like 100%.
Yeah, I've had some people like speak at our school who basically say, well, if you're only going to work 4 and she's going to work 6, like
Mhm.
imagine how much better she's going to be than you in 5 years or
Yes.
whatever. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's not all about like showing up for work for days. It's like, what are you doing when you're there? Like, are you
Yes.
just like a robot for 6 days? Yeah, you're maybe going to do more procedures than me, but like that doesn't necessarily correlate to being like a better dentist. And also like no one's the best dentist. Like
Yeah,
you
no.
can you just want to be like your own version of like a really good dentist. It's not even like it's a competition anyways, but we had a speaker talk like that and I was like, "Ooh."
No, that's like a very hot take. Maybe that's what they experience, but in my experience, you need that extra day to reflect and grow. Here's my schedule. It's Monday, Tuesday, I'm at one office. Wednesdays, I'm at a different office for the same boss. And Thursdays, I have off. So then Friday is like my fourth day. What this does for me is I'm able to have the time to reflect, like, okay, how could I have like been better to my patients? And I'm not just saying that just to be cheesy. My days off, I'm genuinely like, oh, that went well, because I can't help but think about like work, you know? I can't help but think like, how could I have made this better? And giving yourself that space while still protecting your weekends of Saturday and Sunday is so important. I would argue you're going to surpass that person that works 6 days a week because you're able to reflect and change gears. Because, like, remember that period I just told you guys about how like my crowns weren't seating and stuff like that? That fourth day was vital for me to reflect on, okay, how is my prep like this week? That's when I was like kind of like in the back of my mind thinking. I wasn't like studying or anything like that. I was honestly like doing laundry, exercising. But because of that, like my household ran better. So my mind was better. So I showed up to work the next day better. And I felt so fresh. Like when I go into the room, I still have energy to be like the bubbly me and be like, hi, how's it going? Whereas honestly, if I did 5 to 6 days, I would not be able to show up. Like that month where I did that, I was on autopilot just being like, hi, how's it going? Like I just couldn't be me. And that's like a really dangerous, slippery slope to go down.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in favor of that as well. I mean, I can see why people want to work more and like
Yeah, the
so much
money.
student debt and everything, but there's a lot to be said about taking a step back and taking care of yourself and the longevity of your career and your
Yeah.
happiness.
Yeah, like you can get so much more. I think the speaker, I mean, it makes sense on paper what she's trying to say because you have an extra day. So theoretically, the amount of hours, the amount of procedures you're doing more. Yes, theoretically, then numerically it adds up. But everyone knows, you and I know, the people listening know, dentistry is not a tangible, numerical, metric kind of craft. There's the emotions involved, there's the artistry involved, there's the non numerary kind of things involved. And so what you're doing is you're discrediting like the amount of exponential growth that happens when you can be more creative, when you can be more connected to your patients, when you can communicate better. And those are the things that an extra day is not going to give you. It's going to take away.
hmm So also, you had a whole podcast like probably years ago at this point with Jim over
Yeah.
like that element of being no longer a student, like building up your goals with each other and kind of getting things in check there. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so we have a financial advisor who's been really, really helpful just because like they've opened up our eyes to a whole new world of like money and like handling your finances, strategies, handling student loans. There are so many tactics that have to be catered to you, just like how like we as dentists, we don't just look at a patient and we go crown or no crown. We look at them, we go, okay, are they taking care of their teeth? What is the dentition like? What are their habits like? How is the opposing arch? We factor in so many things, and that's what these financial advisors do. So one, that's like my number one tip, is to look into an advisor. They can be expensive, which is why I understand, it's a situation that because I have Jimmy too, like we're able to do that. If you're like single and like, you're still for lack of a better word, you don't have anything to your name yet. I understand because I was, like there too at one point. And so in that case, there's so much free education out there nowadays. There's this one creator that I followed. I think it's like Your Financial BFF or something. There's like podcasts. We've lived in a world where there's never been like more easily accessible information. So I definitely recommend like you know how people say you can control your diet of like social media? Like follow those kinds of people and you can't help but like learn every day when you're scrolling. And then other than that, so people always say live within your means. Obviously, like how you can have fun. Like I've definitely experienced like lifestyle creep, which is nice. But I do say like Jimmy and I kind of pretty regularly review our finances. We're on the same page when we talk about big purchases and stuff like that. We always talk about that. And I think we do more of kind of like a monthly review. Like this is like the beginning of May. So like we were just talking, we're like, okay, like we can afford to like go out to eat a little bit again and things like that. But just making sure that you regularly, periodically have some time to like regroup with your partner to discuss the state of the union, basically. Because you guys are a team now. And I think that's the cool thing, but that's where it can be a struggle too, because it's a new frontier for a lot of people.
Mhm. And you guys are working towards, like, saving for your wedding, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's so exciting. Are you also, like, looking at, like, anything for, like, a future house too? That's, like, a lot of expenses at once, but
Yes. Okay. So we're planning. So right now we're planning the wedding. We did have like maybe like a 2-day period where we looked at some houses. People always say you're supposed to look like a year before you're ready to buy, just to like see what's out there. Right now the market's like kind of not great, but it's good to start thinking like, okay, what is important to me? Do I really want like is it really important to have like this kind of kitchen or this kind of concept, or do I really want a back deck? Like it's kind of the fun part where you're not like seriously looking. So you're just kind of like prioritizing what's important to you. That way, when the time does come, you have a good handle on like, okay, what's a good deal? What's not? What do I want? Because then otherwise it's going to take a lot of time. So what now, since Jimmy and I just financially aren't ready to buy a house yet, it's a good time to do that kind of research and like daydreaming kind of part of it, you know?
Mhm, definitely. And do you think long term you're thinking you'll be an associate full time, or are you considering maybe some kind of ownership?
So it's so funny because when people ask me this question, like straight off the bat, I want to be like, oh, I never want to own. Knowing my personality, I just don't ever want to own. I don't want to be in charge of stuff. I love being able to just show up and like do my thing and then leave. But just like everything in life, life has a way of surprising you. I've heard so many people, like, Joyce the dentist, she always said she was like, I was just going to be like a yoga Pilates mom, show up and then leave and be an associate. But I don't know. I think that when the time comes in many years, who's to say maybe I won't want to? I never want to say never, even though I'm so adamant right now. I'm like, I don't think I would ever want to. I will say I've always wanted to own my own business. And so that's kind of like what the podcast is more so. I feel like I like that it's not like a brick and mortar business. It comes with me wherever I go and I can control so much of it. So long story short, right now, no interest in owning whatsoever. But I never say never just because you don't know the ways that you're going to change someday.
Definitely. And it's fun you mentioned the podcast because I don't think we talked about that yet in this
Mm.
episode. So we're about to record for Connie's podcast after this. And depending when everything goes up, I'll be sure to like link it below and I'll share it on my Instagram too so people can listen to that one too. And I'll also put the other episode I did with you years ago in the description in case people want to know like getting into dental school and pharmacy to dental and everything
Yeah.
because that's a whole different conversation.
Oh my God, isn't that wild?
All right. Well, anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
I think, well, thank you so much for having me. This was like so fun to be here. I love being a guest. Your podcast is always fun to be on. I'm like, watch, someday we'll have to make an episode when I own a practice. Just kidding. But
Literally, yeah, that'll be like 20 years from
yeah.
now with our canes. Just
Yeah.
kidding.
I'll be like, remember? But I guess the biggest message, because I'm guessing a lot of people that clicked on this episode are probably going to be like, future new grads, people are about to enter. And so the best advice I can give right now for where I am is don't focus about the money because the money will so come. The money will come. You have to focus on being around the right people and making sure that you're learning. Because I like love my team so much, there are days where I show up and I feel like I'm kind of just hanging out with my friends. Like my assistant Alex and I just have like the best relationship. My assistant May at the office that I work at on Wednesdays, she and I have like such a fun like friendship. Like all of us have a genuine friendship and care for each other. And so I think that if you put yourself in the right rooms where you feel supported, you're able to grow so much faster. The money will come so much faster. I know there's like loans and stuff like that. Like I know, I get it. Trust me, I get it. But there is something to be said about like earlier how I said how much you can't predict how exponentially you will grow. Being around the right people that are supportive is something that you can't monetarily put a value on until you see it exponentially. I've seen it. I had like my best month ever this last month in March, and it totally came out of left field. Like production like way more like exponentially, and it was wild. And looking back, I was like, where did this come from? And what I realized when I was looking back on it was it didn't come from one thing. It didn't come from one big case. It came from months and months compounded of me working on my skills, becoming faster, getting on the same page with my assistants, my team, my hygienist. And so sometimes I think this is classic of what you see when you start a podcast or a YouTube or when you work a new job is the first maybe like 6, 8 months is going to be crickets. And then all of a sudden you're going to hit a stride and you're going to exponentially go. But you wouldn't be able to predict that looking at the beginning because you'd be like you'd be comparing yourself to someone who's working 6 days a week, making that much more. So just trust the process, trust how exponential you will grow. And because of that, invest in the right people early on and don't worry about the money.
Thank you for that. And thank you for everything in this week's episode. It's been so fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.